This little washstand was sitting in the back of the thrift store and I couldn't just leave it there. I had no idea what was hiding under all this old white paint, but I really wanted to find out. I can't imagine why they'd think it was worth $40 looking like this, but hey, I'm the fool who paid that price, so I guess that's why. I think most people know what these small tables used to be used for, but just in case you don't, back in the 1800s and into the early 1900s, when homes didn't have indoor plumbing, instead of a bathroom, people used to have a washstand or commode like this right in their bedroom. It would have held a water pitcher and a bowl for washing up, and the towel bar across the back, obviously for a towel, with the cupboard or sometimes just a deeper drawer underneath to tuck away your chamber pot, which was basically the indoor toilet. So you didn't have to trek outside in the middle of the night to go potty. Think of it as the original bathroom vanity, or all-in-one hygiene station, if you will. And just like any type of furniture, some versions were built out of really highly desirable wood species with interesting grain patterns and lots of extra details, and others were made in a more basic utilitarian way, which is what this one is. It's got clean straight lines without any fancy carvings or decorative appliques, but it's all solid wood, seems to be structurally sound, and really just needs to be stripped back and cleaned up. Since this is a harder feeling paint, it feels like oil, not like a newer latex that feels more soft and plasticky, and it's starting to crack and crackle. It makes me a little suspicious that it might be old enough to have some lead in it, so I'm going to give it a swab just to make sure that I'm not exposing myself or filling my workspace with poison when I get started on it. These are super easy to use. You just dip the swab in some vinegar to activate the testing chemical. And I try to rub it onto as many different layers as I can, so I'm covering all the bases. And if the swab or the residue that's left on the painted surface turns any shade of pink, red, or purple, that means there's lead present. This one has stayed nice and bright orange though, so I'm safe to proceed. I personally choose not to work on any furniture that tests positive for lead because I don't want to be risking my health, my kids' health, or possibly passing that risk on to the new owner of the furniture. I'm going to go ahead and break this down into as many separate pieces as I can just to make everything a little easier to tackle and make sure that I can properly get all the paint off of the hinges and out of all the little details. I think the bottom of this drawer was replaced at some point with this weird green flocking that's over some press board. It's definitely a newer construction material than the rest and an interesting choice, but I'm not at all shocked to see that this has had some repairs or modifications over the years. It's probably 100 years old. I don't think these wood knobs are original either, and I don't know if I want to reuse them or if I'm going to swap them out for something else. So for now, I'm just going to pop all of these little hardware pieces into a jar and tuck it away so I don't lose anything. Normally, this is where I'd start cleaning off all the dirt, grease, and old furniture polish, stuff like that. But I have a feeling that I'm going to need to use some chemical stripper to get through this paint, and that will eat through all that other stuff anyway. But I do want to take a few swipes with my carbide scraper first to kind of do some recon work. Sometimes it's faster and always way less messy to remove an old finish like this with a scraper, especially if you've got nice flat surfaces of solid wood like I have here. But if you've got a more delicate veneer or a lot of details on a piece, or the finish is just super tough, then a chemical stripper can be the best option right off the bat. This paint is coming off with the scraper, and now I can see all the different layers: the top white, a primer white, a pinky brown, some yellow, and then the stained wood on the very bottom. But I'm going to see if my sander and some coarse 80 grit sandpaper will help me cut through all these hard paints a little faster. As I expected, the sander is just melting the paint and clogging up the paper and not really cutting through things any faster than my scraper was. When it comes to removing furniture finishes, sometimes it does take a little bit of experimenting to figure out which method is going to work best on the particular finish and the particular piece that you've got in front of you. And sometimes that means using all the different methods at once. I'm going to go ahead and pour some heavy duty toxic chemicals on here now and see if that might be any easier on my arms. This stuff works fast. It only needs about 15 minutes before you can scrape it. But on the top here, it looks like it only made it through the very top layer of paint. So I'm gonna pour on some more, leave it again while I work on the doors, and see if I can get the rest with a second pass. This is not nearly as satisfying as I was hoping it would be. It's not even getting down to the wood, just down to the brown paint layer. What a mess. Okay, well, that did nothing but make a mess. I guess I'm going to clean up the rest of this stripper gunk with some mineral spirits, and then we'll go back to scraping and sanding. This is going to be such a pain. Now, I would not recommend using a carbide scraper on wet wood like this, because wet wood is softer than when it's dry, and you can definitely make some bad gouges and do some serious damage. But just because I shouldn't do it doesn't mean I'm not going to do it. I am very impatient. What can I say? At least the stripper seems to have softened things up a bit. Okay, I've been at this for about 45 minutes now, and I think I've got the top pretty much done. It looks like maple. It's definitely a hardwood that had a dark kind of purpley red stain on it originally. I've got my audiobook going in my headphones, and I am going to settle in and get nice and comfy on my stool here, roll this onto its side, and just keep going. Little engine that could, right? Look what I found on the bottom board. A. Perry from Wellington, Ontario. There's no year, but oh, I love that. You can also see on the bottom of the legs here that it's got some holes and hardware for casters. A lot of people just pull those out now so they don't scratch up their floors, and I don't think I'm going to bother replacing them on here, but it's still a neat little detail to see. Clean as we go. Once I get all these paint chips vacuumed up, I'm going to plug in my smaller detail sander because it'll fit nicely into these tight corners, and just keep going with that 80 grit to grind away the rest of the paint. Side number 2, my arms are burning, but I will not let this white paint win. A lot of you have asked me before what I listen to when I'm working out here in the garage, and the answer is all kinds of random things. Occasionally I'll listen to a business podcast, but I'm usually listening to old TV shows that I've already seen once or twice, anything from Friends or Seinfeld to Criminal Minds, Suits, Breaking Bad, The Vampire Diaries. Right now I'm listening to the Fourth Wing book series. It's about magic and dragons and dragon riders, very Game of Thrones. But yeah, I listen to very random stuff when I'm sanding. I think this mess is dry enough to sand now. Even though I know it's going to gunk up my sandpaper pretty quickly, I'll just keep swapping it out for a fresh piece once it stops cutting through the finish for me. caught a break. This green flocking is sanding off so easily. I did think I was going to have to ask Doug to cut a new drawer bottom for me and replace it, but now I think it should be okay. I can put a pretty drawer liner over this press board once everything else is finished and it'll be good. Now that I've gone over everything with my aggressive 80 grit sandpaper, I'm going to go back for round 2 with my smaller detail scraper, a metal dental pick, and a wire brush with some acetone, and some slightly finer 120 grit sandpaper this time to keep working on getting the paint out of all the tight spots and seams where the sander just can't fit, and refine my sanding job. I want to smooth out the wood grain and buff out any swirl marks or scratches left by the coarser grit and scraper. Hopefully it'll also get a lot more of this purple stain out of the way too, although I'm getting the feeling that it has soaked way down into this wood grain. Okay, I think I'm ready to move on to my final sanding pass with some 180 grit. Since I'm planning on restaining this piece, 180 is as high as I really want to go. Anything finer can actually start to burnish the wood and close off the pores, which just makes it harder for the stain to soak in evenly. At this stage, my goal is to get this maple silky smooth to the touch while still leaving the surface open enough to accept some color. I'm also being extra mindful with my sander not to put any pressure on it, because the last thing I want to do is create more swirl marks or shiny spots that will really stand out when the stain goes on. The sander should be the one doing the work for me at this point, really lightly erasing any scratches left behind from the previous sandpaper grits so the finish will come out really clean and consistent. Speaking of stain, there is still a whole lot of this purpley red original color clinging to the grain of this definitely not fine furniture grade wood. And after digging into what would have been used around the turn of the 20th century, it's most likely a longwood or aniline dye stain. Back then, those stains would have been used to kind of punch up the pale look of the maple and try and make it look like a fancier mahogany color. The challenge is that unlike our modern stains that mostly sit on top of the surface, those early dye stains actually soaked in and bonded with the wood fibers themselves. That means that no amount of sanding is ever going to completely erase it. And because the dyes don't respond to things like oxalic acid or standard wood bleach, I can't really lighten them out either. So I think my best strategy here is going to be to lean into a darker stain color that will help camouflage the stubborn flecks and streaks that are left behind. That also ties into another challenge that I found, which is the harp. At some point, it must have been replaced too with pine instead of maple, so it's naturally an entirely different color and grain pattern than the maple of the rest of the stand, and it's also a lot more porous, which means it's going to take the stain differently no matter what. I am just calling it on the inside of the cabinet. I'm going to vacuum out all the dust and cobwebs in here. I'll wash the old paint off with some simple green, and then instead of stripping, I'm just going to give it a new coat of paint. But first, I need to clean up all this mess again. This is the stain I'm going with today. It's a favorite of mine. I've used it a lot. It is water-based, so it dries and can be top-coated quickly, but it's also specifically designed not to need a pre-stain conditioner, and it can be layered to build up the color and coverage if you need. Because it dries fast, I always like to work just one surface at a time, and I apply a lot of it so it doesn't start to dry before I can wipe back the excess in a nice controlled way. And I'm gonna start just with this drawer front so that if I don't like how it's looking for some reason, I can really easily sand it back and change things up. That looks great, so I'm going to do the harp next. Like I said, this wood is much more porous than the rest of the table, so it's going to soak up a lot more stain, but I think it'll be okay color-wise. Wipe on, wipe off, always wiping off in the direction of the wood grain, and this should all be ready to seal in about an hour. This chocolate brown color from Fusion Mineral Paint is going to get the inside of this cubby cleaned up nicely for me. It's an acrylic resin paint with a built-in top coat and really great color coverage. So 2 coats brushed in here and we'll be good to go. Since I used my water-based stain, I am safe to use a water-based top coat or sealer right away. I know most wood purists would prefer a wax, oil, shellac, or even a lacquered finish, but this clear water-based polyurethane is going to do a fantastic job at protecting this table from daily wear and tear. And since it's not a precious, high-value, museum-quality collector piece, I don't see any reason to worry about being historically accurate with the top coat here. I am going to mix a few drops of the stain into the poly though to tint it a little bit and act as a toner that will add a little bit more color to the surface and hopefully further camouflage all the imperfections. This could definitely be brushed on, but I prefer to spray whenever I can. So I'm going to filter this into my pneumatic sprayer and apply the first of probably 3 coats. The first layer of sealer has been drying for about 2 hours, so I'm going to smooth out any rough texture from the wood or dust that's dried into it with a really light rub down of some 400 grit sandpaper. And since I can still see a few little specks of paint through the stain and toned top coat, I'm going to cover those up with this colored resin filler paint and then spray on 2 more coats of poly right over top. Alrighty then, the top coat is done and dry, but I still have a bunch of little stuff to do so I can get this washstand put back together. I poured some more acetone into my little jar of hardware after I sprayed on the last coat of poly, so it should have eaten through the paint on the hinges and screws enough that I can just scrub it away with my wire brush. And then since these are silver and I'm going to be putting some brass knobs on here as soon as the delivery man gets here with them, I'm going to brush on some of this Rub and Buff metallic wax to change their color. You literally just rub it onto any surface and then buff or burnish to set it in place. This gold is probably going to be a little bit too bright to match the knobs that I got though, but I can fix that later on. Once I get the doors screwed back on, I can dab a little bit more onto the screw heads too. These magnetic door catches are going to help hold the doors closed. Obviously, the little metal whatever it was that was on here before was broken, but I'm going to make some pilot holes with this tiny drill bit into the bottom board, and then I'll just screw these down to the ledge, one for each door. And then they have a corresponding metal disc that will get screwed onto the inside of the door and hold them closed until you tug the knob. To figure out where I need these discs to go, I'm just going to put a little dab of paint onto the catches and then shut the door to transfer some paint, and I can screw them into the center of that dot that I made. The screws that came with these are way too long though. If I use them, they'll bust right through the front of the doors. So I'm going to use some shorter ones on here instead. I have a little bit of this peel and stick wallpaper left over from another project, and it should be just enough to use in here and pretty up the bottom of this drawer. And my knobs just showed up. So once I get this stuck down, I can get those installed too. These are a pretty typical Victorian era design, so period wise they work, but they're looking a little bit dull next to this darker wood tone. And yeah, the hinges are too bright gold to go with these knobs. So I'm going to add another gold color of wax onto everything to get everybody on the same page, and then I'll screw the harp and towel bar back in. I did refinish this bar that was on the one door to cover the seam in between them, but I don't actually think I need it now with the new catches. It's not an overly wide gap or anything, so I'm just gonna leave this off. All right, let's rewind back to where this all started. A little washstand buried under layers of cracking, flaking white paint that I grabbed at the thrift store for $40, which was way too much given the condition it was in. But sometimes I just can't resist the mystery of what's hiding underneath, or the challenge of bringing something like this back to life. Now, this is by no means a flawless refinishing job. There are still flecks of that old dye stain that's embedded in the grain, and I keep finding the odd speck of paint that has refused to let go. But that's kind of the beauty of it. Those imperfections, to me, tell the story of a piece that's been around for more than a century and carry little bits of its history forward into the future. And now, instead of sitting forgotten under chipped paint in somebody's musty basement, it's ready to be proudly displayed and put back to work as a functional little storage and display piece inside a loving home.